We're in a series where we're talking about having God's blueprint for healthy marriages and families. Now, again, what we're talking about relates to all relationships. So if you're single or by yourself, this still applies to you, okay? Last week, Jeremiah and Mandy did a great job of laying the foundation of what a healthy marriage and family looks like. And I appreciate the fact that they're striving for that, and I see them successful in that continually. And they talked about how God has laid out a blueprint. This is what we can follow to have healthy marriages and homes. But think about a set of blueprints for a minute, and imagine that you had a set of blueprints for a house that somebody was going to build, and they just forgot one of the pages. Maybe it was the page that the plumbing diagrams was on. Just a little thing. So the contractor, he does his job. He builds that house exactly like the blueprints call for. You get the keys, move in. You walk in to get a drink of water, and there's no faucet. There's no sink. There's no water. The lines to draw the water in and out just aren't there. What are you going to do in that situation? After you're finished suing everybody, you're going to have to literally deconstruct that house, go to the foundations of it, drill holes and do all kinds of stuff to now try to add what should have been in there from the beginning. I believe this is what's happening in American homes all the time. It's not that people don't want to have good relationships and good marriages and be good parents. The problem is they're incapable of doing it. And that's what we're going to talk about today, and how we begin to change that in our lives, how God changes it. According to Dr. Alan Shore, who's one of the leading researchers in neuropsychology at UCLA, he claims that 55% of all adults, and that number is growing, 55% of adults in our country are unable to develop and maintain healthy relationships. 55%. And again, we all want great marriages. We all want healthy relationships with our coworkers and our peers and neighbors and our kids and everybody around us. But sometimes people are incapable of receiving or showing love the way they need to. You may have heard, how many have heard this statement? Love is a choice. You heard that? It's not true. It just isn't. Now, I can choose to do things that look like love. I can be kind to Lori. I can say nice things to Lori. But something has to happen at a deep level for me to feel love for Lori. And there is a difference, right? When you choose to love continually, and that's all you can do, is have to make the right choices. If there's not something deeper inside that's motivating that, you'll give up. And this is what happens in a lot of relationships. Researchers like John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth discovered a connection starting back in the 50s. They started seeing this connection between the events in our early life and our ability to have healthy relationships the rest of our life. Okay? Now, the good news, again, and I want to say this, the good news is that by identifying some of these issues and allowing God to work in us, we can develop the ability to have healthy relationships. And this is something I believe a lot of us have to work on. I'll tell you a little bit of my situation as we get into the message. But long before there was neuro researchers or psychologists. The Apostle Paul gave us the best advice on how to be people who love. He said this in Romans 12:2. Don't copy the behavior and the customs of this world, but let God transform you into a person by changing the way you think. Into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you'll learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. God can literally, and I mean, when I say literally, I mean that, God can literally rewire your brain and create new neural pathways so that you begin to respond differently. You are not stuck in who you are, no matter how long you've been that way. And again, I went through this transformation myself. The Passion Translation says it this way. It calls it a total reformation of how you think. What God wants to do is actually cause you to perceive people and the world differently. Now, how many of you, since you've come into a relationship with Christ, you do see God and the world differently? Sure. And we're all in that process. But sometimes the greatest challenges are in the relationships with people around us because that reveals the most. Those are the people that rub up against us the most. And so that's sometimes the best gauge of how we're doing in this area. Our ability to love God and people is locked into how we think and perceive the world. And here again, this is really important. It is not our unwillingness to love our spouse or our kids or people or God. It's our inability to do it. It's not an unwillingness. We all would love to love more, but it's the inability. And why is that inability there? Well, as I mentioned earlier, research has been done in the area of what we refer to as attachment. If you remember, I did a series about 2 years ago on the brain science and discipleship and why some people just get stuck in their faith and can't grow, and it applies to this as well. But one of the important principles we've discovered is attachment. Attachment is the connection that you make with a parent or a primary caregiver in your life from 3 months to 3 years. In that period from the second to third year of your life, your attachment is formed, or your ability to attach, or how strongly attached you are to that caregiver. Whatever that level of attachment is, you will carry with you the rest of your life. Now, you can try to dodge this and you say that ain't true, or I don't believe that, or that's psychological mumbo jumbo, it shouldn't be that way, I'm a Christian, everything got healed. Well, open yourself up to what God, I believe, wants to say. Again, it's not our unwillingness to love. It's just like there's a limit on our ability to love. We can't give. I remember I used to have things I'd want to say to Lori, and I'd have them all practiced and ready to say it, and then Lori'd walk in the room, and I'd shut down. Just couldn't say it because I went through this myself. You ever meet somebody who's kind of a loner? They don't need anybody. They're that, person who is independent. They take great pride in their independence. They don't need anybody. They're good on their own. Usually those people are also easily offended. They usually have a lot of unforgiveness in their life, and you don't want to cross them. You know people like that? Actually, these can all be signs of poor attachment. Inside is a child that didn't attach well. And here's the thing, if you don't, and when we talk about attachment, really what we're talking about is we would describe it in Christian terms or biblical terms as unconditional love or grace. When a parent loves a child, even when they cry, even when they mess up and dirty their diaper and everything else, and cry in the middle of the night and you have no reason why, and yeah, you get frustrated and you want to help them, but it's all out of love. But if that parent ignored you or got angry with you and you didn't make that attachment, you didn't experience unconditional love. And even when you couldn't define it and didn't have a clue what was going on, there is something inside of you that understood. Early wiring in your brain was being established that you are loved. If you didn't get that, then you just aren't able to show it the rest of your life or receive it. I mean, if you're on the other side of that and you are married to someone who has poor attachment, you will spend your entire life trying to be perfect and care for them and love them, and you will give, and get very little back. And that's a hard place to be. And I know a lot of people that live there, and they're trying their best, and they're praying for grace every day, and God does give them grace, but they're overwhelmed because what they should be getting from their spouse, they're not getting. And so as a result, they're giving everything they have, and they are empty inside. See, what is hardwired into our brains is just what's there, and it usually comes out under pressure. In Matthew 12, Jesus said this. He said, "How can your words be good and trustworthy if you're rotten within?" Now, Jesus didn't call people rotten. He said, but what is inside of you is not healthy. For what has been stored up in your hearts will be heard in the overflow of your words. But again, you're not worthless. You're not a bad person. It's just that there is something, a limitation that you have that you can be healed of. See, what happens in most relationships is this funny thing, and now we can measure it. It's really cool what we can do with the brain. And now we can put, an fMRI, functioning MRI, hook up somebody in one of those, you can actually see brain activity as they're doing stuff. Because before, if you wanted to study somebody's brain, you had to take it out, which made it really tough for them to communicate and talk about what was happening. But now, wearing this, they can see like a mother's interaction with their child, what parts of the brain are firing, and so on and so forth. And there is really this chemical thing that happens in our brain when we meet somebody and fall in love. We refer to it as romance. And romance literally blinds us to people's flaws. That's why all your friends can tell he's a jerk, and you can't. Yeah, you wish you trusted your friends, don't you? I mean, you're just in love. And so love covers everything. And then you come to me for a little premarital counseling, and I'm trying to help you get your life together, and I ask questions like, what is it that you don't want to take into this relationship? And they go, blue. I go, what? They go, our color's going to be blue for the wedding. Yeah. And we're going to have really good cake. Because that's where their head is. Because they've been tricked by romance. You know how long romance lasts in a relationship? 12 to 18 months. You wake up one day. What happened? This isn't the person I married, Mom. He's different. No, just the romance wore off. And you pressed the right button, and the right thing came out, and all of that was in that person and that's in you create a problem. The number one indicator of future divorce is if you come from a divorced family. I tell couples, especially when they're both come from the product of divorced homes, I go, you've got 2 strikes against you. You're going into marriage with some real weight. You've got to be able to address this. You've got to be able to establish some strong values. You've got to be committed to the institution of marriage. My parents stayed together and they didn't get along at all. But somehow they were committed to the idea of marriage. I think Catholic guilt did a lot of it, but it's just what it was. You don't get divorced, of course. You don't get along, but you don't get divorced. We get these places in our lives where we're unable to love. Sometimes it's because of poor attachment. And sometimes it's because of trauma that happens later in our lives. So we talk about, if you remember this from a few years ago, we talked about 2 kinds of trauma. The first type, B trauma, is just bad things that happen to us. We get abandoned, we get abused, we get taken advantage of, we get betrayed in some way. All these things. Sometimes it's financial trauma, it's natural traumas, health issues, family health issues, and so on. And all of these bad things can stop our ability to love because we're just empty, or we've been hurt, so we're guarded. And that's one of the tough things, because too many people have trauma growing up, or poor attachment, which is a trauma we'll talk about in a second. And then they carry that in their relationship, and then they hurt the person they're with, and they hurt them, so then they drag that extra baggage into the next relationship, and into the next relationship. But what do we have operating in our brains all this time? Romance. And romance just keeps us going back for more. See? And we end in this terrible cycle for people. And then there is a trauma, which is absence. That's just the unconditional love that you didn't get, again, as a child. And if that's the case, the problem is you don't accept unconditional love unless it's perfect, unless it's exactly the way you want it at that moment. If that person can't read your mind and give you exactly what you want, then you're ready to bail. And that just increases over the time as it becomes more impossible for that other person to sustain you and just constantly give and give and give without you having to give anything back. You get empty if you're the one giving and getting nothing back. Now, out of these two, if you remember, which is harder to overcome, A or B? A trauma is much harder. Reason why is B trauma, at least you have that idea in the past that your parents loved you or that somebody loved you and that you have something to relate to. The problem with someone with A trauma, they've never experienced love. They don't know what it is. They don't know what it is to live with self-sacrificing love, to give to another person in case, and even if they can't give back. I hear a lot of people talking about marriage being 50-50. We've talked about that. 50-50 doesn't work because you never really meet in the middle. There's a lot of times Lori has given 100%. I've given 0. It's been the other way around, but not very often. And if we didn't have that commitment, we wouldn't be able to be in relationship. But we both know what it is. If I have the unconditional love of God, if I have Lori's unconditional love, then my life is so much better. See? Here's the other sad thing. If you have a trauma in your life, you cannot accept God's unconditional love because you have nothing to relate it to. That's the place where I was. I could get up in church. I was 10 years in the ministry. And I would get up and talk about the Father heart of God, and God's a good Father, and He loves you. And in the back of my mind, I'm going, yeah, them, but not you, Tony. You're different. For some reason, God just doesn't love you. Oh, you may have those few emotional moments, but I didn't really believe that I was worthy of God's love, number one, and that God was really that loving. And so that's what I lived with for a long time. And I felt almost hypocritical. I would pray for people and they would receive God's love and go, oh, God's love's wonderful, isn't it, Tony? I'd go, yeah, I guess. Yeah. I was a pastor. But I didn't know any of this. I just heard, well, you just pray more. And just repent more. And maybe that'll help it. Maybe that'll fix it. So I felt like if I opened up to other people, if I opened up to God, it was just too much of a risk. I couldn't take being hurt. And like I said, I think that went all the way back to my early childhood. But here's the good news. God healed me. He can heal any kind of trauma in your life. But there's a frustration in us that things we should have learned as a child about unconditional love and grace and acceptance by others and other people, we just didn't get that. And so it is a process to come back. Like, for example, let's say, me and James, we decide we're going to learn the piano. And so I called James. James, you practicing? He said, yes. Are you practicing? Yes, I am. We're accountable and we're doing great. And then all of a sudden, the next day I go to play and the lid of the piano falls down and the piano falls down, crushes my fingers. And I'm in 10 casts. Like a hot dog fingers for a while, and then here I am, and I can't do anything. And James keeps practicing, So eventually I get the cast off, and James is over, and we start to play, and he's 10 times better than me. Well, that's not fair. But see, he's been learning all of this time and developing. I have to go back to the very beginning. Now, this is difficult for adults because they say, well, I don't want to have to go back and learn how to love. Are you kidding? I don't want to do that. I don't need nothing. I'm fine the way I am and all that. But reality is, wherever you stopped maturing, that's where you got to go back to and start. I was childlike in my ability to love and my ability to trust. And one of the things that God used was not only seeking Him, of course, and renewing my mind with the Word of God, and just having those times of intimacy where God would begin to reveal Himself more and more as a Father. But one of the more challenging aspects of my life was to allow God to use other people and relationships to bring healing. And a lot of the healing that happened in me happened because of people that loved me. And that was tough because, again, if you are independent, if you've never been loved, you tend to guard yourself because you don't want to be hurt. And anytime you think of a relationship or being around somebody, you see it in negative terms. I don't want to go hang out with them because deep down inside you're going, they'll just hurt me. And I have to go in and put this mask on when I come into this situation because I can't let people not like me. So I would go into a room and size it up. What do they need me to be? And sometimes moving from conversation to conversation was what do they need me to be? And that wears you out. You'd rather just stay home. And now not all introverts have attachment issues, but some do. And more, and I feel like if anything, COVID really brought this out in people as they were isolated. And it seemed like it magnified. So here's something I've learned and I want to share with you. Years ago, 2 Harvard researchers, and I can't remember their last names, but Joseph Luft and Harrington Ingram, in 1955, came up with this way of kind of looking at relationships. And they took the first part of both of their names, so Joe and Harry, and they came up with what we call the Joe-Harry window. Now, if you have YouVersion, this is in there, this chart, or you can take a picture of this one. But this really helped me. This was huge in my being able to heal. How many have seen this before? It's funny because yesterday I was talking to some friends and Jorge said, you know what really helps people? He says, the Johari window. I went, really? Because I'm sharing that tomorrow. So here it is, right? So basically, there are 4 quadrants of everybody's life. The first part is the open. The open part is what you know about me and what I know about me. I'm Tony. I'm married to Lori. I live in Indianapolis. I'm 5'10", getting shorter every year. That's who I am. And that's the open part. It's what everybody knows, or it's easy for them to find out. But then I have this closed part of my life. That's the part that I know about me, but it's unknown to you. Why? Because it's none of your business. And the more private you are, and the more you've been hurt, and the more insecure, and the less attachment, the more you keep that door closed, and people don't come in. Then there's the blind part. That's the really scary thing, because that's what you know about me that I don't. Oh, that's horrible, isn't it? You got something in your nose there, That's a little thing, So, but it could be a big thing too. Somebody corrects me about something or says something. I go home to Lori and pout and so-and-so picked on me. They said I do this. And she goes, yeah, you do. How come you don't tell me? Because you don't listen. You don't want to know. You'd rather be blind. Think about it. There are people around you that in your circle of friends or family, you know that person that has blind spots that everybody sees but them. Yeah. And how embarrassing to be that person. Then finally you have the unknown area. And that's what you don't know about yourself and other people don't know about you. You haven't explored that. So, in a marriage, in a family, in a work group, in a life group, in all areas of our life, the best relationships are those that are the most open. But the only way that you can open your life to other people and expand that open relationship, which is a far greater relationship in any setting, is you've got to do 2 things. First of all, to move from the open to the blind spot, you got to ask people, hey, if you see anything in me, or if you see something that, or, I wasn't sure the other day, did I offend you when I told you we were ugly? I mean, I didn't mean it that way. I meant it in the kindest way, but, or whatever it is, what I'm saying. But to ask people, to ask them, hey, if you see something, let me know. That's not just accountability. But I was talking to somebody about accountability this week, and I said accountability is good, but we only have to be accountable for what we want to be accountable for, right? What we need in our life are spiritual dads like me. Because I come into your life and I go, how's this area? No, really, how's that area? And I just poke into areas that I'm not even supposed to because I love you and I want to help you. And when you give God that permission and me that permission and we care for you, then God can do amazing works of healing and grace in your life. And we have enough people around here that have been around the block and that really love people that would be great to be that older, more mature voice in your life. And every one of us need that. I was telling these guys yesterday that I have like 3 men in my life that I trust with my life more than myself. In other words, they can say things about me and say, Tony, this is going on in your life. And my response used to be so insecure, it would be like, I'd start dancing. It's not really me. It happened one time. That was the exception. Oh, you weren't there. Oh, I didn't mean that. And just anything to cover it over and look good. Now I've learned to go, help me see it, because obviously I don't. I'm deceived. So help me see it. I trust you to help me. And they'll say, well, you did this and this. And oh, yeah, you're right. Help me with that. Because I want to be a better person, better husband, better friend, better pastor. See. Then, if I'm going to expand that open area more, I'm also going to have to tell you about my life. That's really vulnerable. The first week in a life group, you're probably not going to tell your darkest sins. But as you develop relationship with people, and as you know somebody else is wrestling with something that you've wrestled with too, and you've learned to gain some victory in these areas, then you're willing to share that. See? I know marriages that have never moved that box. It's still in the same place or even more guarded. It gets smaller. Because every time I open up to you, you hurt me. So the door closes, the walls are built even bigger, and healing just can't take place. Now, one of the cool things that happens is, look at what happens when you ask other people about your life and you tell other people about your life. It pushes into this unknown area. And we've all had that happen. A spouse or a friend go, you could do that. Oh, not me. Yeah, go for that job. You could do it. I think you could handle that position. And then you take that risk. Why? Because that relationship is there to support you. And you know that even if you mess up or even if you're struggling with it, they're going to be there with you. You need these kind of relationships. You need a marriage like this. You need to be imparting this to your kids so they're secure. You need to open up to your kids about your life, parents. You don't want to tell your kids, well, I don't want to tell my kids I had sex before I got married. I don't want to tell my kids I did drugs. Fine. You think they'll ever come to you and talk to you about it? No, because you have no experience. And you were perfect. Why would they relate to you? Now, what you do is you tell them the truth. And then you tell them the pain and devastation it caused in your life and why you needed a Savior and how Jesus filled that place. That's the gospel. That's the gospel lived out at home, not just waiting for a Sunday school teacher to explain it with flannel graph, which is good, but they need to see that the gospel works in your life. So, asking, telling. This keeps our relationships from being shallow, and by intentionally telling and asking, it increases attachment and thus our relationships with our spouses, the people around us, and with God. So this is something I believe that we all have to work on because we're constantly getting hurt out there and people are offending us and I'm watching people, it's just like hair triggers now all of a sudden and traffic and everything else. And we have to constantly combat this because the tendency is to go back to our little corner and make it smaller instead of extending that and reaching out and loving people. Opening our lives means deeper intimacy with someone else, and this creates a new pathway for us to receive the love of God. You'll receive the love of God through your spouse more than anyone else. You'll receive grace and unconditional love through them. You'll receive it through your kids as you give it to them and build this into their lives. And it's not too late. Your kids may already be raised. That's okay. Start with asking and telling. How secure are you? How do you think we did? What could we have done better? And talking to your kids about that. John said this. He said, if someone says, I love God, but hates his fellow believer, the person's a liar. If we don't love people we can see, how can we love God who we cannot see? Retreating into ourselves, cocooning in our life so we can't get hurt is just not the way to live. By loving people, we learn to love God. By showing love to people, God loves us back through them. And that's an amazing thing. See, all of us grow up emotionally and spiritually. And it makes us better people, not just people who try harder. That whole thing about, trying to show love, choosing to show love. It's even better than being a genuine person with the love of God in them. Jim Wilder and Dallas Willard wrote a book on this called Renovated. I want to read a quote here. He says, "We don't try to do these things. We become the kind of people who do these things. If you try to do those things, it will just kill you. But if you receive love as a principle of your life in all dimensions of your being, then you will see love. Love is kind, love does not envy, and so on, all the way down the line." He's referring to 1 Corinthians 13. "And having received love, you will be transformed into a person who loves." And sometimes it just takes opening up and saying, you know what? I'm just not experiencing the love of God in my life. Pastor, can you help me? Sure I can. I know where you are. I've been in your shoes. And I know what God's done to free me. Colossians 3:14 says, "For love is supreme and must flow through each of these virtues. Love becomes the mark of true maturity." It's not how much of the Bible you know or how much you serve or what's in your bank account or how happy you are. It's love that is the true mark of maturity. I like how Eugene Peterson in the Message Bible quotes Jesus from Matthew 5:8. He said, "You're blessed when you get your inside world, your mind and heart put right. Then you can see God in the outside world." I think there's a lot of people who are Christians, but they live with this constant guilt and shame and never feeling good enough. Never having too much of the world to really enjoy Christ and too much of Christ to really enjoy the world. So they live in this place of non-equilibrium in the middle that just is impossible to sustain. And for some of you, the bad thing is that you've never discovered at your depths what it is to be unconditionally loved, especially by God. And sometimes, like I said, it comes through people first. Other times it comes through God first. But we need both. So, let me just review real quick. If we didn't get good attachment when we're young, we're going to struggle with that the rest of our life. The best thing we can do, it's not your fault, but God wants to help you. He wants to attach to you. He wants you to have great attachments in your marriage and all your relationships. Secondly, we all experience that A and B trauma in our life that makes us feel a little bit insecure, and it's hard to trust people. God can heal that as well. God can heal everything from our past if we're just willing to open our lives and ask. And sometimes I do this with God. Father, show me my heart. Show me what is in me. Show me what's good and what's bad. Show me what you want to work on and free me from. And I'm just honest about that. And He's continually doing that in my life and will continue to do it. And I have to be willing to tell God and others, this is where I'm at. This is what I need. This is how you could help me. So, here's what I want you to do. Turn to somebody around you. If you're sitting with somebody, if you're not, you don't have to go out of your way. But just turn and share one thing today that kind of stuck with you. Do that now. Share it real fast. You don't have to re-preach it. But then secondly, what I want you to share is, what's one thing you can maybe work on this week? You know, it'd be really incredible if we had a marriage retreat like next weekend. Wouldn't that be amazing? to be able to talk about these things and work through them and have a wonderful time. I just want you to do that to help reinforce a little bit what's going on inside. It's a freeing day. One of the most freeing days for me in my life was when I told Lori, I'm resigning from the church. I'm going to quit my position. I don't know what I'm going to do, but God really needs to work in my life. I'm tired of faking it. I'm tired of not really comprehending. And it was when I began tasting the love of God that I realized how empty I was. And I just wanted that more than anything else. And what I thought was going to be 30 days turned into 5 years. Through a cycle of business and everything else before I went back into ministry, but this time with a whole new perspective.